to have a place where we can welcome people in, where people feel comfortable and cherished and loved, and where we serve each other with humility and with love. And so the home, it doesn't have to be something grandiose. And that's kind of what I came to as I'm meditating on these things and trying to detach from things. It doesn't have to be this huge, magnificent thing, very impressive. As some people said, your home is meant to nurture the souls within.
Here we go. Welcome to a special edition of the Focusing Way podcast. I'm your host, David Battistella. We call these special editions The Way is Love. Find The Focusing Way on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and our website, thefocusingway.com. The little way of living with less. It's a funny old world we live in. Over the course of my life, the mantra of more seems to have been pushed to the public in unimaginable ways in a relentless attempt to have us all become the fruit of industry. We consumers consume, and much effort is made to move people to consumption, and more often than not, over-consumption. Somewhere along the way, I wanted to simplify, to have less, to do more with less, and to use what I have rather than contribute to the excess of a modern world, bent on having me play the obedient role of consumer. In her book, The Little Way of Living with Less, Laraine Bennet takes the simple teachings of Saint Theresa of Lisieux and blends it with a method of reducing one's life in size and footprint and getting back to essentials. She shares personal stories we can all relate to and takes downsizing to a spiritual level by incorporating the teachings of this great saint in order to help humble us a little and live our lives consciously with less material and more spiritual. Consuming a volume like this will help you see clearly the minor messes in your life that might be hindering your progress. We can be thankful for the saints who are wonderful examples, even in modern times, of how to move our life toward God and detach from the material things which can weigh us down. Here to speak with me about her book is author Laraine Bennet. Laraine Bennet, welcome to the Focusing Way podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me back on your show.
I read your book. I enjoyed it very much. And the first question I have for you is, why do you feel this is an important time to introduce detachment to the American mindset?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, I think we've never been more wealthy. It seems like our this country is just completely overflowing with things. We have so much stuff, and we are continuing to accumulate more and more. And it's not just physical things, but it's also digital. When I think about how often I go on social media or Instagram, and they're constantly trying to sell me something. And it's like our lives are cluttered with more than just physical things. Although I just read a statistic that the average home has 300,000 items in it. 300,000. And I'm sure in our country, in this first world, we probably have even more, and we throw out a lot too. Anyway, so there's material things, there's digital things, there's the clutter even in our souls, I think. And then the material things actually add to the clutter of our souls. And so that's kind of why I think that's one reason why I thought this was an appropriate topic for this time. And, I forgot to say also, we're not any happier for all our stuff. That's kind of crucial, because the statistics lately have been showing that many people are sadder than they've ever been. There's a lot of anxiety there's a lot of there's depression, and some of these things are probably related to COVID and whatnot. But definitely, I think the accumulation of things contributes to that anxiety and that depression as well.
Yeah. And your book takes the teachings of Saint Theresa of Lisieux into this idea. And I'm just going to read a quote from the saint here. She says, "And do all in your power to detach your heart from earthly cares, especially from creatures. Then be assured our Lord will do the rest." Close quote.
Yeah.
But it's not just those material things we're attached to. And I just want to read another quick quote from the book, which is, "Regardless of whether one sells all of one's belongings and sets off across the Atlantic to start a new life, one can remain attached to one's own vices, to unhealthy habits, and to sin. We can be attached to our own will, our own viewpoints, and our way of doing things. We may be attached to our need for control, for comfort, for power, or for admiration." Can you just talk a little bit about all of those attachments that aren't these material things?
Yeah. Well, I think that for me, the Israelites in the desert really speaks to me, and that's why I included it, the story from Exodus in the book, because it seems to me like it describes the human condition. And we are all like the Israelites in that God has saved us and brought us out of slavery, but they're so funny. We laugh at them because they're like constantly whining and complaining, and they're being led by God. Every day he's leading them personally through the desert, and he is providing them with manna in the desert. They have food, they have quail to eat, they have everything they need, but they say, "Oh, we wish we could go back to Egypt when we were in slavery." We want to go back to the flesh pots, right? And I think that's how we all are with something, if not many things. In my own life, I would say many things, like physical things as well as these immaterial things that you just read from the book about. But we seek that we want to stay in our comfort zone, and that comfort zone, we feel comfort or we feel secure because of X, Y, or Z. I mean, it could be some people need lots of things around them to feel like they are, in control, or that other people need to have admiration, or they need, they need power. There's so many different ways we can kind of seek to kind of make ourselves feel comfortable in this world, when in fact, as Saint Therese is telling us over and over again, what we really need to do is just trust in God. That's the most important thing. If we trust in God, then we won't need all these other things. We can detach from these things. But it's a difficult process to trust in God. Yeah. Especially with the way she did, so completely and totally with confidence and love, as she said.
That's so true. Mm-hmm. And you're right. Our surroundings are so important to us. Like you just illustrated with that story about wanting our surroundings back, even when we're being taken on a better journey, as the Israelites were, and you talk about big things as well as little things, and the tiny details, but the big details. And a favorite topic of mine has always been suburban planning and how we organize our exterior spaces. But how do you feel, or what do you feel American suburban planning has done to our culture?
Yeah, and I talk about this in the book because we fell into this, like, just wholeheartedly. We bought a 4,000 square foot McMansion out in the suburbs, and we had to drive an hour and a half to work each way. My husband had to do most of it because he was working every day. I was part-time. But he, the toll that takes on him, we didn't even really fully appreciate it until we didn't have it anymore. But, so we have this giant place where everybody is sort of isolated within their own castle and they have everything they need in that space, and they don't even need to go out. And in fact, even if you do go out, you can't get anywhere because you can't walk anywhere.
Yeah.
They're being a little bit more sensitive because they realize people like to walk and it's healthy, but they are now building a little walkway around, some of these. Like, we lived in a place that had a pretty nice little walking path,
Yeah.
but you couldn't actually get anywhere, with it. You couldn't go out to eat or go to church. You can't walk to church. You can't go. You have to drive everywhere. Everything is separated by zoning laws. You drive to work, you drive to school, you drive to church, you drive to a restaurant, and there's no integration.
And then gas shoots to $8 a liter or gallon,
right,
or whatever.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, what's really interesting about that too is, like, I live in a city now that's built on a human scale. I walk through it every day. There's it's in a about a 1 mile radius, and included in that also was agricultural land and gardens and places where people live. And you had this experience like this. You open the book with this whole story of going, moving to a small German village and having to. So can you talk a little bit about that? That mindset, going from like the big American sprawling suburban home to this other experience?
Yeah. Well, and on top of it, we were coming from California. Yeah. So we're like, anything goes. But it was funny because we just had no idea what we were in for when we landed in Germany. And we quickly realized that things were very different, and that our mindset was not matching up with with anything in that. And at first it was like really jarring because we just kept trying to do the things that we did back in the United States, in California. And I would get in trouble all the time for I would break some rule that I didn't know was a rule.
Right,
So, our kids were noisy. We were noisy. We would try to take them to, a German restaurant. Sometimes we got kicked out,
Wow.
And we were like, where's the McDonald's with the balls, the plastic balls? That's what we want. And even the McDonald's there were much better. But then eventually we grew to realize that there are other ways of living, and there's other ways of thinking about things. And we learned that how the Germans valued so many details, like the beauty of the lace in the windows, or a little mobile that the kids had made at the kindergarten, and we started to really appreciate and some of the festivals that they had. They're just so wonderful, and walking everywhere and not being able to shop. We grew to really appreciate that we couldn't shop every day at 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They had quiet time, and the shops would close at a reasonable hour in the evening. And then Sundays, everybody was out with their family walking, strolling through the fields or the forests. It was just lovely. And so, I think this, on the spiritual level, what it kind of taught me was that we were kind of strangers in a strange land, as the Bible says, and that we are really on a journey. We're on a pilgrimage, and our true home is really not here. Our true home is heaven. And so as much as we like where we are, and we tend to like throw down roots wherever we are and really get settled in and comfortable, really we are called to keep in mind our true homeland.
You talked about Instagram earlier, and everyone's got their viewpoint on social media and technology and its benefits and pitfalls. Do you feel like technology has us longing for more human experiences? Like, almost that the promise of it has pulled us back to being more human and less getting together in a technological way?
no, I think more people are still pretty attached to technology and even don't, and actually maybe don't realize the importance of the human connection, because and I'm not sure, you might have a different experience in Europe, because we were just there this past May. We walked 115 kilometers of the Camino de Santiago de Compostela, and one of the very first things that struck us was how many people were sitting in cafes, drinking coffee and talking, and just with each other. Whereas here, you go to Starbucks and everybody's on their computer or whatever cafe you go to. And we noticed like large groups of men, groups of women, groups of men and women. And we were thinking, here, I don't think, I think especially for men, I feel that there's a dearth of connection and conversation and really getting together. And maybe because men are already more maybe technologically savvy, and maybe they're more prone to that or whatever, or it's just more difficult. I don't know. That's maybe for another topic. This is kind of off the topic here, but we did notice that we felt like in Europe, at least, people were still getting together, and despite COVID. And I mean, I don't know. Here, I don't think, I feel that people are very isolated here. I do. And I'm hoping that people are starting to realize what you said, that, that we do have a longing, and we because we are social beings and we are built for communion. And people are coming back to church too, but not as everybody says. It's not as it was before. So pre-COVID, more people were going to church. So people are still afraid, I guess. I don't know.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
You write, quote, "When our closets, pantries, and linen closets are overflowing, we immediately assume we need special shelving units, a set of matching glass containers, or perhaps some cute woven baskets and bins to corral our stuff. And under the bed, we store the overflow of Christmas wrapping paper, seasonal clothing, linens, and baby items we're saving for friends, siblings, or grandchildren. As a result, all of our collective collecting and inability to toss things, the guest room closet is filled with clothes that don't fit and shoes we can't part with." You've obviously lived this.
Yes.
But I just want to take it back to Saint Therese for a minute. And, what has this saint taught you about paring down, about living with less?
Yeah, well, we actually, as I mentioned, so we dramatically downsized, went from 4,000 square feet to 1,500, and then we downsized again to 1,100. And through this whole process, I had to, detaching from these things, many things that were, and it was actually very, very difficult, I have to say. And other friends told me, this is why I, wanted to write the book, but friends said, this is so hard. And I'm like, yes, it is hard. And so I was turning to Saint Therese because the virtues that she practiced like so beautifully were virtues that I felt that could guide me in this process myself. So the virtues like humility and trust and simplicity and gratitude and poverty of spirit, these are beautiful virtues that I felt I needed to grow in, and in order to detach from these many things that I had.
You talk a lot about home in the book, like just this idea of home and how the homes surrounding us form community. What attracts you to that subject? What is it that attracts you to that?
Gosh, well, I feel that, again, it's part of the human condition, and I feel that particularly probably women are more, really attracted to or called to make a home, in the sense that we want to make a a home for our families, or even if we don't have a family yet, if it could be single women or whoever. But I do feel that we particularly feel that call, but probably everyone does, to have a place that where we can welcome people in, where people feel comfortable and cherished and loved, and where we serve each other with humility and with love. And so the home, it doesn't have to be something grandiose. And that's kind of what I kind of came to as I'm, meditating on these things and trying to detach from things. It doesn't have to be this huge, magnificent thing, very impressive. As some people said, your home is meant to nurture the souls within, not to impress other people. That's not what it's about. So how do we get back to that understanding of home, which really is what we all want, whether we're minimalists or maximalists, or whether we have a big house or a little house. Really, that's what we want. And yet we kind of end up seeking it in ways that might not be actually the best. Like, well, maybe I need better furniture, Yeah. Is that going to provide that sense? No, that probably isn't. So I do kind of want to explore that, but at the same time, realizing that this isn't our ultimate home. So we always have to, there's that tension there with what we are drawn to create as human beings. A comfortable, a beautiful, but not magnificent necessarily, but just loving space where people can gather. And isn't that like what we really want? That's what really makes us happy is, we have people over and we talk and we grow to enjoy each other's company even more, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, you mentioned the Holy House in Loreto in the book, and I visited that place last year. And what struck me, besides the fact that it's only 11 feet by 33 feet long,
Wow.
And that's the home that was home for the Holy Family. It's also the place where the Annunciation took place. And yet it's in this tiny space. And it's conserved in this place with the altar to the apostles, with a place to pray. And so, how do you feel about structuring that inside a home, or how much that tells us about having a very small shelter, a very small space is the necessity of life, as opposed to filling large spaces with lots of things that we think are going to make us happy?
Right. Yeah. St. Therese was struck by the house. And she contrasted it to the basilica that was next door. She didn't even want to go there. She skipped out, I think, she went with her sister Celine, and they attended mass in the little house itself, which she said where peace, poverty, and joy reigns supreme. And she's really touching on such an important point. And then she lived that out as well, because she lived in this little tiny cloister. She's a nun and she has pretty much nothing of her own there. And she also understood the attraction of the allure of material things, because she does write about that. So she understood what she was giving up. And she had a beautiful home that she grew up in, actually, as well. So she understood the love of comfort and of beautiful things and that, but she knew that the more difficult route, but the way that she had to go was to kind of renounce that and to live in a small space, which, despite the fact that she had such a small place that she lived in with really nothing of her own, she had this great interior freedom. So, which many of the saints, especially those who, and spiritual writers, those who have been imprisoned, they all attest to the interior freedom that they experience, and it's not about their surroundings. So I think that's an important part, because we sometimes, maybe because of our clutter and our many things that we have, we are at the same time not feeling free. We're feeling sort of enslaved by these things. In fact, there's that the neuroscience pointed out that the more clutter you have around you, your brain sees it as a problem to be solved, and you kick in, your adrenaline kicks in, and you actually experience anxiety. So we're surrounded by many things, by clutter, and we're experiencing anxiety just from that fact. So it's like, on many levels, we don't want so many things.
So very true. And Saint Therese left us at a very young age. What does her early passing tell us about how to live our own lives?
Well, we don't know when, any of us, we don't know when we're going to be called to go back to our true home, to go to heaven. I shouldn't say back to, but anyway, yeah. So we might, we should be prepared. I think she probably, being the great saint that she was, I think she suspected her even before she was, actively having the symptoms of tuberculosis. I think she suspected that she was going to have a short life. And I've heard that other saints say the same thing. So I guess they're so longing for heaven that they are ready at any point in time to go to heaven. But in the meantime, most of us are dwelling here on earth, and we tend to get really, I think it was Father James Shaw said, we are so easily fascinated by the things of this earth. We're so easily fascinated, and then we get distracted and then we go off in that direction.
Yeah, it's no wonder so many, especially Carmelite saints like Saint Therese and the other great church doctors, Saint John of the Cross, Saint Teresa of Avila, why they're stressing so vehemently detachment, and to focus on God, God alone, God alone, God alone. Mm-hmm. Those are the words that are repeated, and the ones to be focused on. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to go to another quote in the book. You write, "Inner freedom is not a matter of physical space, but rather it's an interior disposition. This interior freedom depends on the Holy Spirit. Quote, the wind blows where it wills, and you hear the sound of it, but you do not know whence it comes or whither it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit." And that last quote is from the Gospel of John, chapter 3, verse 8. We're sort of touching on that sort of sense of freedom, or sense of being kind of imprisoned, or even imprisoned by our own stuff. Mm-hmm. What can you say about that?
Yeah, well, we did experience that ourselves, I would say, when we, kind of got rid of, sold the house, got rid of like all the large furniture. We had lots of, you can imagine, large furniture that to fit in the large house. And and in fact, I had this, I describe in the book, I had this one table that I was like, I finally got rid of like all this other stuff, sold or gave it away or whatever. But it was down to this one thing that I had, like, I wrapped up all my, I don't know, psychic energies into this farmhouse table. And I was very emotionally attached to it. And it's also very beautiful. But so I bring it to the new tiny house and it literally doesn't fit in the dining room. So what do? I'm still attached to it. So I unscrew take it all apart, unscrew the legs, etc. And I shoved it under our bed. and it's under the bed for a while. I don't even remember how many months. And then I'm telling a friend about this, my beloved table. And so many memories, all the kids sitting around the table, et cetera, et cetera. And he goes, well, why don't you just give it to one of your kids? They probably could use it. And I'm like, yeah, well, easy for you to say, it's not your table, and then I kept thinking about that. And I'm like, he's so right. What's it doing under my bed? That like defeats the very purpose of the table. It's tableness, it's not even being used. And so finally I gave it to our son and daughter-in-law, and they're 4 kids. So they can appreciate it. And then I did experience this freedom, the freedom, because there's more than just freedom from the material thing. There was also the freedom from a kind of the emotional attachment, the imaginary image that sometimes we get. I think maybe women particularly are prone to this. I don't know. We build up a fantasy, let's say, of everybody is going to come every Thanksgiving to my house from now, until forever, until the end of time. Yeah. We're all going to sit around. We're going to, have these wonderful meals that I am cooking. My wonderful cooking, and we have this like lovely image, which probably is never really realized in reality. And other people have the same, they have the image. You look at Instagram and you say, oh, they look at their house, that's so beautiful and so clean. Why is mine not, and these kind of these it's a lack of reality. It's a lack of living in the present moment. Actually, it's thinking about the future, what I wish I would have, or it's thinking about the past, what I remember fondly or not fondly, whatever. But we're called to really live in the present moment, not to be constantly wishing I was somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so that's all part of it as well.
You just mentioned Instagram, and there's a very important point you made in there about how ultimately doom scrolling leads to envy. And as Catholics, that's one that we really need to be wary of. Can you talk about that? Right.
Well, I think Instagram itself really brought this to my attention in myself. It's I'm amazed at how I can be perfectly happy, having a cup of coffee or whatever. And I start looking through Instagram and I'm like, what is that person doing? And what do they have? And I want that thing too. And and then the ads play right into it because they know what I like because they've seen, they measure how long you pause on a particular picture. So here's a funny story. My husband paused on some bear mauling story. And he happened to see once, and he said he's flooded with bear mauling stories on Instagram. And I'm like, whoa, that's terrible. And he's like, yeah, I don't know how to get rid of this, but it's like I pause on something for the home. I pause on a new sofa or a really cute ottoman that I see at West Elm or whatever it is, or new clothes or what somebody is wearing. There's just so many things, or somebody's, their beautiful home that, out in the country, by a flowing river. And I'm like, and pretty soon I've wasted like an hour. It's amazing how fast time goes. Yeah. And what have I been doing but just indulging in fantasies and envy?
It's incredible to me because you would never invite someone into your home to do that, yet invisibly people do it on a daily basis. And you've basically got this invisible big brother person measuring your every move. Yet if that person was standing in your space, you would be having them probably leave in short order. It's the equivalent
Exactly.
of that, but because it's the invisible nature of
Yeah.
it, and these things that are quote unquote free are never free.
Right.
So
Yeah, exactly. You're so right.
the interesting thing I liked that you talked about is that ultimately, like anyone who's listening to us could say, well, what do you have to be perfect? Like, is this all about perfecting your space and not having too much stuff and everything's got to be perfect?
No.
Isn't it more about finding one's own inner compass?
Yes, exactly. I think that's a good expression for it. And I talk in the chapter on simplicity. That's kind of what I was trying to get at. It's that each of us, we want to feel integrated within ourselves. We want to feel that our environment somehow reflects our priorities, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be minimal. It doesn't have to be whatever the latest thing is. But it needs to be consistent with our values, I would say. And that was that idea of simplicity. I always think about the Amish when I think of simplicity, but Ronald Knox talks about simplicity in regards to Christ being perfectly integrated, perfectly focused on his mission, perfectly one with the will of God. And as he set his face toward Jerusalem, that's the expression that he brings out towards. I mean, it's that 100%. I guess attunement to the will of God and consistency in that regard. And Saint Therese had that same simplicity and same, I would say, intensity of focus on what she was doing, because she, every single moment of every day, she didn't want to lose any opportunity to gain graces for poor souls or missionaries or whoever she was praying for. So she did every little act she did, every little tiny thing was seen as an opportunity to do that thing with love and with as much love as she could have for God. And that's kind of what the Amish do too, in a way. They really have that focus on the present moment and on what they're doing. Like, let's say they're baking bread. Well, they're just intensely focused on that, and they see it as a way of serving God and their neighbor. Yeah. And they're not trying to be somewhere else. Like what happens when you're scrolling Instagram, you want to be somewhere else. Or, when I'm imagining my table with everybody around it, and, I'm not in the present moment. The present moment is what I have to, I need to be in the present moment to receive the grace of the present moment and to be focused on those who are in front of me at the present moment. Yeah. and that sort of thing. And I think that's all part of simplicity.
It reminds me of the Benedictine rule, which is ora et labora, work and pray, which in essence is work and love. Yeah. Because as you're in the act of praying, of offering this work to God and being grateful for the moment you're in and what you're giving up in that moment, and you're giving it up for Him, the work and pray, ora et labora, that is part of their foundational teaching, is this kind of constant act of love. Also makes us very, very productive in very many ways, and peaceful, because we enter into these things with an attitude that is rightly ordered. Right. Okay. So, and just this, a lot of what we're talking about is rightly ordered things, and cleaning up is really the art of letting go. Right. And just to take it back to Saint Teresa's teaching, how was she able to let go? How much she was able to let go, and how inspiring it is to, when you read about her life, that her ability to sort of give everything up.
Well, she's kind of amazing, because each time I read the story of the soul, I feel like I'm like discovering even a deeper point that she's making. But I love her discussions of her incredibly delicate charity that she had for the nuns, that in the convent with her. And a lot of them did not appreciate her at all. And in fact, one of them said, after she had died, they said, well, what are you going to put in the obituary? Because she entered at 15, and then she lived here 9 years and then died. And so, in fact, that obituary, so her mother superior had actually, what she did is public. They used her autobiography as the obituary. And that's when everybody found out what was going on inside her soul. I mean, and that it went viral back in the day. And then people all around the world started like writing to the Pope at the time saying, canonize, make her a saint, and miracles are happening, and all over the place. So it's really amazing. But to get back to the point, which was, no, I lost my lost my train of thought.
Her ability to let go.
Yeah. So what she described there, that people, even people she lived with, did not realize, was how many acts of charity she practiced. And she's detaching from her own self is in each of these situations to such a degree, because, like, for example, one of the stories was one of the nuns comes in and says, who would like to help bring in a Christmas tree? It was a Christmas tree that they were using to decorate for Christmas or whatever. And Therese knew that her companion sitting next to her wanted to do that. Like, that would be such a delightful task for her. She knew this. So first of all, there's that charity, that she knows this. So she starts to take off her apron from what she's doing very slowly. And that gives the other girl a chance to go out, say, I'll help. So she goes out, helps with the Christmas tree. Meanwhile, the original person who had asked who wants to help comes up to Therese and says, and chastises her. I knew you would be so slow. You're such a bumbling, slow person. And she called her a nanny goat. Like, this is incredible. Like, I don't think this is even all written out in the story of the soul, but she describes the incident, but she doesn't give all the details. So the additional detail we find out from, her sister, her sisters were very, pro Saint Therese. But anyway, so we find the further story, and it's even more like, and she doesn't defend herself at all. She doesn't say, oh yeah, I could have gotten up quickly, but I was letting her do it.
Yeah.
Which is what I would do. I don't want to be criticized.
But in her humility, she recognized it would be uncharitable to defend herself or put herself before, or say, even say that she was performing an act of charity, because it would diminish that act of charity.
Exactly. So that's how profound her charitable acts were. It's just, it's amazing. And she's she's in her 20s, It's like amazing. It's very difficult we hope to try to be as charitable. But anyway, she gives us great inspiration for being more charitable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to end by sort of being grateful. First of all, for our time together today, but also talking a little bit about how large a role gratitude has to play in shaping our lives.
Yeah. And this is really kind of the crux of the matter too. And gratitude is at the heart of the little way. And she was grateful at every moment for every single thing that she had and for all of God's gifts. And she pointed out that gratitude actually, when you are grateful, it actually draws down more of God's grace. And I think we can recognize this in our daily lives. When we are grateful, we become happier. And even psychologists have shown that those people who practice gratitude, whether it's just saying thank you for taking out the trash for me today, or whether it's writing a note of thanks to somebody, to a friend, whenever we do this, we become more happy. And so it's very beautiful that both psychology and the spiritual life, they agree on the importance of gratitude. And if we were more grateful, we would not be always longing for that which we do not have, or seeking to acquire more things, or being frustrated with our whatever present situation is. And the gratitude, just everything is a gift from God. So we should be grateful at every moment.
I love that attitude rhymes with gratitude, and may we all be in an attitude of gratitude whenever possible.
There you go.
Laraine Bennet, thank you so much for joining us today. I've been speaking with the author of the book, The Little Way of Living with Less. Laraine, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on your show. It's been lovely talking with you again.
Check us out on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, our website, thefocusingway.com.